looking at anterior insular function and particularly its role in network switching across different individual populations and different disorders as well. So our lab has been working with neuroimaging data analysis for many years, particularly functional magnetic resonance imaging data, so fMRI data, and using different modeling approaches to try to understand how brain regions interact, both in the context of doing some complicated, cognitive processing, but also in the resting state when the brain isn't really taxed with anything at all. And something we've noticed over and over again is that there seems to be some unique properties of the insular cortex in terms of the timing of activation, in terms of the ability to sort of predict what's going to happen at later time points in the brain. There seems to be some coordinating function that we see, particularly when we look at dorsal anterior insular activity. And so a lot of groups have now started focusing on this region and its role in across different clinical conditions. And we focus a lot on autism spectrum disorder in our own lab and other neurodevelopmental conditions, but there are other researchers who are looking at the role of the insula in schizophrenia, for example, or in later life dementias. So we think it's kind of a brain region that we really have to understand better in order to understand brain dysfunction. Some of the things I'll be talking about at the meeting are meta-analytic studies. So basically, those are studies that look across, many, maybe hundreds of individual neuroimaging studies and look for common findings across many, many different task paradigms, for example, or just across many different individuals. And so there's a few things that have popped up from meta-analyses. And one is that the insular cortex is just very active across all different task conditions. So you see it in many, many different contexts, whether it's studies of emotion or affective processing, or whether it's higher cognitive processes like inhibition and executive function, or even sensory processes. Basically you see it all the time. So the question is, what are there some more general roles that this brain region is playing? And so we've kind of started to call it the salience network, as in combination with the anterior cingulate cortex, it forms this system that seems to respond to any kind of salient, whether it's visual or auditory or even internally generated memories, anything that's requires attention, we seem to see this network activate. So if the fire alarm goes off in the building right now, we would see anterior insula active along with the cingulate cortex. It would be signaling something's worth paying attention to. But even like strong memories or emotionally driven kind of things would also activate this system. So it seems to be very broad and general in the kinds of responses we see. So the meta-analytic evidence shows these kind of broad activations across different conditions, but there's also specific subdivisions of the insula that seem to be more related to emotional processing, for example, or more related to higher level executive functions for, on the one hand, like the dorsal anterior insula seems to be more involved in those high level processing. So a lot of the work comes from meta-analytic functional task-based studies. And then in addition, there's a lot of connectivity analyses we do looking at are different parts of the insula differentially connected to other brain regions and how do they interact. And there's something interesting again about the dorsal anterior insula there, in that it's one of the most functionally flexible regions. So it sometimes has functional connections with frontal cortices, sometimes parietal, et cetera, et cetera. It's very variable from moment to moment in terms of what other parts of the brain it's communicating with. So I think that helps. And there's some structural connections. The wiring underneath is also unique in a way that helps facilitate that role. So I'll talk a little bit about, function, structure, and activation profile of these brain regions and how we think that enables their sort of ability to be involved in all these different kinds of processes.